Okay, so this presentation is going to be on the Me Too movement. And throughout this presentation, if anyone has any questions or any comments that they would like to share, you can go ahead and just chime in. So I just wanted to just touch upon some history from this movement and to look at it from its beginning all the way to what's happening now with this movement. So we're going to first look at the origins of Me Too. So since 1989, Tarana Burke has been an activist. And I thought it was quite interesting that she started her activism in 1989. So she moved from Selma, Alabama in the 1990s after graduating college, and then she started to participate in youth camps. And she participated at these youth camps that were for uh, children of colors. And when she participated in these youth camp, she met a particular child named Heaven. And now what I want to do, I want to quote from the Me Too website of her experience with Heaven. So, quoting, Heaven asked to speak with me in private. I knew Heaven as a sweet-faced little girl who clung to me throughout the camp. However, her hyperactive and often anger-filled behavior betrayed both her name and the light, high-pitched voice with which she spoke. I was always having to pull her out of some type of situation. As she attempted to talk to me that day, the look in her eyes told me this conversation would be anything but ordinary. She had a deep sadness and a yearning of confession that I read immediately, and I wanted no part of it. Finally, later in the day, she caught up with me and almost begged me to listen. I reluctantly conceded. And for the next several minutes, this child, Heaven, in a halted voice, told me about her stepdaddy, rather, her mother's boyfriend, who was doing all sorts of monstrous things to her developing body. I was horrified by her words, and the emotions welling inside of me ran the gamut. I listened until I literally could not take it anymore, which turned out to be less than 5 minutes. Then, right in the middle of Heaven sharing her pain with me, I cut off this little girl's story and directed her to another female counselor who I believe could help her better. I never, I will never forget the look on Heaven's face. I will never forget because it haunts me today still. I think about her all the time. The shock of being rejected, the pain of opening a wound only to have it abruptly forced shut again. It was all on that precious little face. But I wasn't ready to help. As much as I love children, as much as I cared about that child, I did not yet possess her courage. As much as I loved her, I could not muster the energy to tell her that I understood, that I connected, that I could feel her pain. I couldn't help her release her shame or impress upon her that none of it was her fault. But most of all, I could not find the strength to say out loud the words that were ringing in my head over and over again. I just watched her walk away from me, visibly struggling to recapture those secrets and tuck them back into her hiding place. I watched her pull her mask to put her mask back on her face and return to the world. And as I stood there, I couldn't even bring myself to whisper the words circling in my mind and soul. Me too. So this and other events led Berg to initiate Just Me Incorporated in 2003, an organization that promotes the wellness of young female minorities between the ages of 12 and 18. Berg coined the phrase Me Too and founded the Me Too movement in 2006 through her nonprofit. Berg, who was sexually assaulted as a child, worked with young survivors and found that the phrase Me Too could help assume others, that could help assure others that they weren't the only ones experiencing this type of abuse and to raise awareness of the perverseness of sexual abuse and assault in society. It was not the origins of the phrase Me Too in the context of sexual abuse survivors, but Alyssa Milano's tweet is largely recognized as the tipping point of the modern Me Too movement. So here on the screen is the actual tweet that she did on October 15th of 2017 that all started the online Me Too. So she just has here, if you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write Me Too as a response to this tweet. So that was her original tweet. And then, of course, there were others that started to respond to her original tweet. Now, she tweeted this in response to the news reports of sexual abuse by film producer Harvey Weinstein. Her tweet was posted, and within hours, tens of thousands of people replied to her call for action. Within 24 hours, Facebook reported more than 12 million reactions connected to hashtag #MeToo. In the following year, hashtag #MeToo has been tweeted an average of 55,319 times a day. Now, Burke initially she was skeptical. She felt defeated um, by this phrase going viral because she was thinking that this phrase would be only connected to Hollywood, that it will only be connected to a certain class of people. And she feared that no one will believe that this Black woman in her 40s, could actually be doing this. So she worried that communities of colors would feel excluded. And after a while, her fears were actually fading because she started to realize that survivors were able to start healing and start the healing process because now they're having a chance to be heard. Also, Milano, she did give credit to Burke for that phrase, Me Too, and that also helped Burke to feel better about what was happening online with hashtag Me Too. So in October of 2017, the New York Times and the New Yorker reported that dozens of women had accused the film producer Weinstein of rape, sexual assault, and sexual abuse over a period of at least 30 years. And over 80 women actually eventually accused him of these types of abuse. Now, he did deny this abuse and he said everything was consensual. But afterwards, after this announcement and these women coming forward, he was dismissed from the Weinstein Company, the Academy of Motion Pictures and Screen, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, and other professional organizations. And he seemed to really retire from public view. So, criminal investigations into complaints from at least six of the women took place in Los Angeles and New York and London. And in May of 2018, Weinstein was arrested in New York and was charged with rape and other offenses. In 2020, he was found guilty of rape in the third degree and of criminal sexual acts, and he was sentenced to 23 years. But that conviction was overturned on appeals in 2024 because of procedural errors that happened during the case. However, a new trial was allowed, and Weinstein was sentenced to 16 more years after being convicted in Los Angeles on one count of rape and two counts of sexual assault, which he did appeal. Now, in July of this year, prosecutors in New York informed Judge Chris Harbor that they intended to bring more charges of rape against Weinstein, stating that claims fell within the state statute of limitation. And in September of this year, Manhattan prosecutors announced that a grand jury had indicted Weinstein on new charges. So the details of the indictment remain sealed following this announcement, and the New York trial was set to start November 12th, but that didn't happen. Um, it was rescheduled basically for January. So I believe January 29th, they are going to relook at this new trial with these new charges. And of course, he has pleaded not guilty for these charges. So that is basically the beginnings of the Me Too movement. I spoke about Burke, how she started within the movement, how hashtag Me Too started. And now I want to look at how media actually affects Me Too. So, in order to get a full grasp of the Me Too movement on social media and how it is used, we're going to look at sociolinguistics. And social linguistics studies the relationship between language on one hand and society on the other, more particularly social relations. It studies how human beings use language to and to what purpose they use that language. And so I wanted to look at how language is used in the media and how it affects me too, because I think that all stems back to information war. How language is used has to deal with information that we receive. So during the Me Too movement, women spoke up through language, denouncing systematic abuse and demanding that changes be made in society and in social relations between men and women. The movement was built progressively, and interestingly, social media was not used the same way throughout the whole movement, and social linguistics help us to understand why that was. So hashtag Me Too really turned to social media, but the Weinstein case actually developed primarily through traditional media like print and radio and television. It is still important to keep in mind that even the denunciations against Weinstein were mainly done through traditional media. About 72 of the 90 cases at that time were all made through traditional media, but we can still find these denunciations, of course, online. But originally, they were um, done through traditional media. So it is interesting to note that those women actually first chose traditional media to make their denunciations and claims public, with a few starting on social media. One element that is essential to take into account is that the two newspapers that extensively covered this case and did in-depth investigations and analysis were New York Times and the New Yorker. These stories these women reported were disruptive. Weinstein was a very prominent businessman inside and outside of the film industry, and these women needed to establish their legitimacy in order to be believed. So one way of doing that was that they actually were having their stories backed up by reliable newspapers. So either the stories were reported by journalists who lended legitimacy to their claims, or the victims themselves wrote like opinion pieces in their own names. But again, the newspaper was their like le their backup, right? So it lended legitimacy to their claims. So the theory of denunciation supports this idea of how this went about, how these women were able to put forth their allegations and their claims in public. So this theory argues that the higher the profile of the aggressor and the bigger the difference between their status in society and the accuser, is the less normal the denunciation is seems to be. So normal is the sense of plausibility. So you can have this big gap between where the aggressor is looked at in society and where the accuser can be looked at in society. So the bigger the gap, the more believable, right, these claims are. This is how people think, this is how society kind of puts these things together. But having the support of this newspaper like the New York Times was important because then it kind of created a more of a balance, right? Because you have someone accusing Weinstein of abuse, you have this credible newspaper backing you up. It lends more to the believability of your actual claim. So this need to legitimize their stories is also apparent in the language that was also used. So we wanted, it's not only the accuser speaking about the aggressor and their how far we think of them on a social pole, we also need to look at the language that was used. So, one of the first things that was striking in the denunciations against Weinstein was this very stick to the facts style. So, these denunciations were more fact oriented than emotionally oriented. They only centered on Weinstein. And when claims were made, the accusations were also specifically mentioning the issue of the relationship between men and women in Hollywood. So we're looking at the relationships between men and women in Hollywood, and also we're looking at how the denunciations that were placed upon him, how it was more stick to the facts, and we're going to be specific in these in this writing and how the reports came out. So it was only logical that such a movement in society should start with women who were more renowned, right? Because these are women actresses and so forth in Hollywood. So they have more status than um, just an ordinary woman in society. So it is important that to this movement that you first have women who are kind of known societally to bring up these accusations first compared to just an ordinary woman doing this. So the movement and its claims needed to be legitimized by well-established people before broadening to society um, as a whole. Now, in November of 2018, Burke did a TED Talk, and her TED Talk was titled, "Me Too is a Movement, Not a Moment." So this talk didn't just focus on Weinstein, it didn't just focus on Hollywood. Um, in fact, it focused on like the society at large, just thousands of people saying that they have been victims of sexual assault. So social media, especially Twitter, made this possible. This represented a great change compared to just the 90 women who originally accused Weinstein as abuse. So now you have more people starting to denounce abuse and wanting change. So on Twitter, there were ordinary people, not just Hollywood stars, that are starting to express their abuses. So the movement we saw at first, where it was just limited to Hollywood, is now starting to broaden to society as in general. So this was confirmed with linguistics, this analysis that was done with the tweet. So we know that there were many, many, many tweets after Milano did her original tweet. So more than 50,000 tweets were posted in the first 24 hours following her first tweet. And if we just think about the first hour of hashtag Me Too, which represented over 3,000 tweets, almost 4,000 tweets, if we try to analyze these tweets using specific software that can scan these tweets, the whole set of tweets, we can identify some linguistic characteristics about these tweets. So these tweets showed that the most significant themes and concepts that came up were all linked to sexual assault and harassment that women suffered. The results, therefore, showed a direct link from the Weinstein case and how it outlined the scope of the movement. So you have first how the first um, tweet happened connecting to the Weinstein case, and how the tweets following all connected because they're all involved sexual harassment and assault. So there is a direct link from the traditional media, the original um, accusations, to social media with these tweets. So what these results showed us that there was this tendency towards generalization. There were very few details about the types and circumstances of the assault that people tweeting Me Too were reporting, which differed from the case in which the denunciations were specific. On Twitter, all the different types of assaults were gathered all under of an umbrella expression, sexual harassment or assault, which was used 273 times in the first hour. Giving less detail on Twitter does have to do with the amount of characters you can use in a tweet, which prevents the victims from giving more detail of their experiences. But it's significant that the movement should have moved from traditional media to social media and to Twitter in particular. With the character limit, it shows that the movement on Twitter was not to provide people with a space to explain what they went through, but rather to identify as a part of a community. So what comes out this analysis of these first tweets is that this generalization process was put into place. The different experiences and victims are gathered together in a community that is built through this network of tweets. So you have this generalization or focus on commonalities. You have Me Too as a movement moving from the personal to the political, which is an essential step to transforming this movement from a moment to a movement, which was the title of Berg's um, TED Talk. So it has connected thousands of similar experiences and highlighted the systematic social character of these experiences, all in order to conclude that the personal is political. So you have these original women making their claim on traditional media, being really specific about their claims, being really personal. Then you have in moving to social media where there was not enough space on Twitter for people to get specific. So then you get this more generalized um, effect happening where people are combining their experience into a community. So that's how you can see how you have this personal is the political and how there's a connection here with the Me Too movement. So next I want to look at feminism. And I want to talk about the fourth wave feminism. Now, I know that some say there's three waves, some say there are four waves, but I'm going to go with four waves. And so, though Me Too started back with Burke and her original Just Be Me Incorporated, it really started to take off in 2017. And the 2020s is the beginning of the fourth wave of feminism. And this wave focused on sexual abuse, harassment, sexual violence, gender-based violence, the objectification of women, and sexism in the workplace. And internet activism is a key focus of this wave as well. So the fourth wave of feminism broadens its focus to other groups, to include LGBTQ community, to include people of color, and advocates for increased societal participation and power. It also advocates for equal incomes regardless of sex and challenges traditional gender roles for men and women, which it believes it is oppressive. So the fourth wave develops slowly globally via media and the internet. Now, the wave emerged from a new generation of women who had largely not been informed about previous waves through their education, like in high school or in college and things like that. So they had not been given a large information source of feminism and all the waves. So they say that the fourth wave emerges from people who haven't had much knowledge based on feminism. So the knowledge about feminism was gained informally and it developed like we can say like a virtual academy where feminists start to believe and understand and learn that the personal is political. So it didn't emerge from a structured feminist learning. So the fourth wave feminism is about drawing together in a collective group to work together towards a common goal of ending violence against women in order to be free, for them to create their own path and to be able to reach their own dreams and their desires the way they would like to. So it's like a mutual commitment to support women. This is what we can see from the fourth wave. Now, the third wave of feminism began introducing this concept of male privilege. And in their writings in the 1990s, they started to write more about this male privilege. And fourth wave feminists continue to discuss this male privilege, and they have begun promoting solutions to avoid these issues. And one way that fourth wave feminists have tried to promote this discussion of male privilege is to raise their kids as gender neutral. I'm sure we have seen and heard about that, how people try to give their children gender neutral clothing and toys and things like that. So this is a way where we can try to promote this gender equality and not this male privilege. So fourth wave feminists have argued that The reinforcement of gender stereotypes create pressure for men to be breadwinners, as opposed to women who feel obligated to have this role to be a homemaker. Feminists argue that these pressures conform socially can cause gender discrimination in the workplace and in society more widely. So they believe that having these gender roles is just promoting discrimination because you have this set things that you want to say these are a man's role, these are a woman's role, and eventually all that leads to is just discrimination in society as a whole. So when we look at feminism, we know that there are several waves of feminism. But even within feminism, even within the waves in feminism itself, there is a divide. And I want to talk about a divide that has been happening in feminism due to Me Too. So when Me Too began in earnest, many women felt optimistic, but unexpected divides emerged between feminists. Some urged caution, others wanted the reckoning to go further with the Me Too, but the most common complaint about Me Too came from those who felt that the movement had very quickly became silly. Some self-described feminists complained that many of the incidents of harassment were too minor to warrant condemnation. They argued that both groups together um, that these behaviors of well these misbehaviors that was happening had just were just silly, that some people or some women I should say were complaining about things that didn't need to be complained about, that were very um just not important, and some felt that this was really hurting feminism. So what people who felt this way thought should happen is that women should just toughen up. They said whatever happened to this no nonsense rejections of men. They just believe that women could solve the problems of sexual harassment and assault with good humor, patience, and just a high tolerance of pain. Um, but not all feminists believed this logic. So this disagreement was quickly characterized in the media as generational. So that's what people believed at first. They believed that quote unquote older feminists were just saying, oh, hey, you younger ones are just complaining for no reason. You just need to be tougher. Where they were saying that quote unquote younger feminists were just saying, no, anything that makes you feel uncomfortable needs to be dealt with. So, first, they were saying there was this generational divide. But if you look closer to what was happening between these two ideas, these two camps, it reveals a more deeper intellectual divide. What's really happening here is that one can say that feminism has come to contain two distinct understandings of sexism and two different, often incompatible ideas of how to solve the problem, how to solve this problem that's happening. So even though the first thought was maybe there is a generational divide that's happening in feminism over what's going on with Me Too, but no, there's a more deeper divide. So you have one approach, one side that's like the individualist. They're grounded in ideas of pragmatism, realism, and self-sufficiency. But the other side, you have an expansive, more communal, idealistic, and premise on the ideas of mutual interest and solidarity. So the clash between these two has been starkly exposed by Me Too. So there may have been these divides in the past, but when Me Too presents itself, it just exposes it even more. So the central claim of the anti-Me Too feminists is that the movement does not treat individual women as moral agents with the capacity to say no. It's an ethos of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. They believe that the pervasiveness of sexual assault suggests that it's inevitable, that the best response is not anger, but resolve. Theirs is a feminism that argues that individual women have the power to make choices to diminish the negative impact of sexism and to endure any sexist unpleasantness that can't be avoided. But you have, on the other hand, the other group that are all for Me Too, saying that Me Too, an individual woman makes herself a part of a broader group who chooses to stand with others who have been assaulted or harassed or raped. This solidarity is powerful, but it is rare to see such a large group of women identifying their sufferings as a woman's suffering, claiming that they all have been harmed by the same forces of sexism, and together demanding that these forces be defeated. So you can see these two sides, this divide that's happening. So the diversity and the breadth of Me Too movement is not a weakness this second group believes, but is a strength. After all, if so many women with so many different kinds of lives have experienced the same sexist behavior from men, then it becomes easier to believe that the problems go beyond individuals and instead it relates to the wider culture. The ubiquity of sexual harassment means that an individual can't simply avoid it by just making right choices. The divide between these visions on how to undertake this feminist project, of which tactic is the best, whether it's through individual empowerment or through collective liberation. That is how we can class the two divides, this individual empowerment or collective liberation. So you have these two streams of thought because you have the Me Too critics um, saying that we need to look at how a woman can say no on her own and have this self-sufficiency, and the other group saying no, we need to have this communal um, collectiveness. So whether you have a woman's um, being a woman's responsibility to navigate this and withstand this misogyny that she encounters by herself, or whether there's this shared responsibility of all women and people to eliminate sexism so that women can't encounter it in the first place. So you have this tension. So this tension has affected the movement since the feminism movement since like the mid 20th century. And according to the individualist model, you have personal responsibility, individual freedoms, and these psychological adjustments often a woman can do to help her oppose this patriarchy and to try to gain this equality. But you have this social model that's been influenced by people like Kimberly Crenshaw. Now, Kimberly Crenshaw, her aims are to confront the combined nature of sexism and racism in the lives of Black women and to analyze how people who experience both of these sexism and racism, how this phenomena is very distinctive. So in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw, she wrote a legal article um, titled Demarginalizing the Interconnection of Race and Sex. And so what she called for is this new way of understanding oppression that she referred to as intersectionality. So this meant that taking into account that the ways that oppression looks different for different people and how individuals experience oppression along more than one axis at once. So, in practice, this approach suggests that an effective movement against patriarchal oppression must also confront systematic inequalities. So, you have these two groups, these two camps, and you have this more individualistic approach and this more social approach. And if we look at the social approach, it also connects with Crenshaw's intersectionality, where we need to also look at societal inequalities and how people can experience it, sexism at more than one axis. So since we have looked at the origins of Me Too, how did it come about? How it moved from traditional media to social media? How Me Too is a part of the fourth wave of feminism because when we look at the fourth wave of feminism, it's a more internet activism. We can see that Me Too has exposed a divide with feminism into these two groups. Now I want to look at what actually happened a year later after 2017, after this initial um, spark of Me Too by this tweet. So in 2018, we could begin to see whether the Me Too movement had achieved anything. Most obviously, some men disappeared from the film industry because remember, the whole tweet and everything started with Weinstein, right? In the film industry. So first we can see how men disappeared, like Bill Cosby, of course, Weinstein, other individuals that dropped were dropped from projects, that stepped away from production companies, and some were even expelled from the Academy of Motion Pictures, and some changes were permanent, but some weren't permanent. So 1 year later, we do see how Me Too is affecting the music, not the music, the movie industry. So Time's Up is an organization that was founded in Hollywood to help end sexual abuse in the movie industry. So this organization has raised millions of dollars in legal funds and amassed volunteer lawyers. And they have also donated to women's organization. With their assistance, the Producers Guild of America drew up and issued anti-sexual harassment guidelines. The guidelines include training for all cast and crew and designated people that the workers can actually approach to report any incidents. Other unions, like the Screen Actors Guild, have issued their own guidelines and policies as well. So there has been this action happening after 2017 to try to help people in the field be able to report incidents, having these sexual harassment guidelines and things like that. So some things have been happening or had actually, because this was in 2018, um, to help people who are victims of harassment or abuse. So there has been some issues have been addressed, but of course, issues like equal pay and gender parity still exist. Those issues have not been resolved. There's still issues when we're being inclusive for everyone in the music industry. Inclusivity is still an issue as well. So there has been some things that has happened, but there are still more things that need to be done. So we looked at 1 year after. We also want to look a few years more in the future. We're going to look 5 years later. What changes have been made 5 years later after Me Too? So the Me Too movement is credited with giving visibility to the scope of sexual violence within the United States and also across the world. So we know that Me Too didn't stop with the United States. It did extend to other countries around the world, where other countries also had their own Me Too movements. Um, some countries with their Me Too movement, like France, for instance, they had their movements where they focus more on the perpetrator, um, and exposing their perpetrators and making them accountable for their actions. So again, 5 years later, we can see how it has expanded to other countries. So, Me Too has been defined by a push for accountability, including examining power structures in the workplace that had enabled misconduct, and in some cases, renewed efforts to seek justice for survivors through criminal and civil court systems. Oh, I think a chat just came up. Oh, a few chats are there. So if anyone has a question or wants to make a comment, you can just shout it out. The Me Too movement's legacy has broadened to encompass issues related to gender equity in the workplace and legal reforms to eliminate barriers that had prohibited victims from coming forward. 22 states in the District of Columbia have passed more than 70 workplace anti-harassment bills, according to a 2022 report by the National Women's Law Center. And states have abolished statutes of limitations for reporting sexual crimes, required workplace harassment trainings, have banned non-disclosure agreements that aim to keep misconduct allegations from public view. So there has been some things good that has happened since Me Too, like the few things that I just named. So that's great that we can see that Me Too expanded from Hollywood. It also has touched workplace issues. It's touched different industries, not only film, but music and the arts. And there's lots of other industries that Me Too has touched. So, although we have these reforms and these protections in place, they're not all still adequate, of course, especially the protection against retaliation. So, if you have a woman speak up about her abuse and then she gets retaliated against at work or wherever she may be, that still needs to have greater protection as well. So that still needs to be in place a little bit better than it is. So not only do we need more adequate protection against retaliation, also you have women of color not being protected as much through these policies that have been put in place. You have women with disability, immigrant women, LGBTQ women, and women who work in low-paying jobs. They have not been covered as well with some of the policies that have been put in place um, by in these last few years since Me Too. So even though there are some good things that have been done, some of these other groups have been outside of those policies, and so that needs to be done as well. So since we looked at what happened a year after Me Too, what happened 5 years after Me Too, I also want to talk about what happened after the election of November. So, after the election of Donald Trump, on social media, there has been a surge of posts and internet searches about 4B movement. So, the 4B movement. So, some American women have expressed interest in the 4B movement as a form of protest of Trump's election, his allegation of sexual assault, and for his role of overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, the 4B movement is the four no's. So it's a feminist movement that originated in South Korea. So the name refers to the defining four tenets, which all start with the Korean language term by, roughly meaning no. It proponents do not date men, get married to men, have sex with men, or have children with men. So those are the four tenets of 4B. This movement emerged around 2018 in the wake of Me Too. And so it circulated on Twitter as well as on social communities based in South Korea. So after the election of Trump, you see this emergence of 4B due to the sexual allegations against Trump and things that he's done, like his effect on the Supreme Court in order for them to overturn Roe v. Wade. So you have this 4B movement. Now, the 4B movement is meant to protest misogyny, gender discrimination, violence against women, and it's served to as this direct opposition to patriarchal state and to combat other policies. And these other policies that they have in South Korea are connected of to women's bodies and how their reproductive abilities are tools for the state's future. So you have the election of Trump happening where American women are starting to promote this 4B movement, which started in South Korea, which also emerged because of Me Too. So again, this goes back to how other countries had their Me Too movements, and now you have this other country's Me Too movement affecting America's Me Too movement, where this 4B movement has been emerging. Now, some say this 4B is not going to catch on great in the United States, but I still wanted to mention it because, again, it comes back to this community, right? You have this community of women in the United States that affected communities of women in other countries, which are in turn coming back and influencing back to the United States, and as well as I'm sure um, other countries' movements affecting the United States, but more particularly, that one has emerged with great interest. Well, I wouldn't say great, but lots of internet searches and lots of Twitter videos after the election. So, concluding. So, today's Me Too work continues to focus on assisting a growing spectrum of survivors, including young women, queer, trans, disabled, communities of colors. Because again, some of these groups have not been um, included in lots of policies that have gone out. Me Too want to continue to help individuals find their right point of entry of their unique healing on their unique healing journey, but they also want to work to disrupt the system that allows sexual violence to proliferate in the first place. This includes insisting on accountability on the parts of the perpetrators, along with the implementation of strategies to sustain long-term systematic change, right? So you want long-term systematic change. You don't want menial, minimal changes that won't benefit anyone. We want systematic change. Me Too, they believe and they want one day to be able to say that no one else, they don't want anyone else, no other groups of people to say me too. They want to disrupt the system. They want to um, bring down this sexual assault culture that we have. So I wanted us to see that what's happening with Me Too, how did it start? How is it affecting us? How it does have some similarities with our movements. And the similarity that I thought was really important was that how Burke said you have a moment into a movement. And to me, that's the personal is political. And another thing about Me Too is we understand that we are not saved as individuals. We are saved in this movement, in this community. And that's what Me Too believe. They believe that it's not this individualism, it's this collectivism. We can help each other. We can strive to not allow to have this ability for no one else to say me too if we as a community, as a movement, work towards that goal to disrupt the system, to change the system. So that is what I have to share today on Me Too.
Thank you,
So
Shelmika. That was
again,
really good.
oh, thank you. So again, if there's any comments, questions, thoughts?
Your presentation was very straightforward and very structured. I totally understood it as you went through it. You explained it very well.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't know if I missed it. Did you mention, because the New York, you talked about the New York Times. They actually
Mhm.
did a movie. If I missed it, did you mention that? They actually did a movie. I think it's on Netflix that documents
Really?
that through that.
Actually, didn't know about the movie.
Yeah, they went through the process of what they went through, the New York Times
Mm-hmm.
in the investigation, and then
Oh.
and how they, how it all exploded.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if anybody saw that. It was so thank
On
you.
on the Weinhardt case. And he actually threatened them because there
Yeah.
was the women there were a couple women that did the investigation on it and he actually threatened them. It was interesting.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting how the information was disseminated. I didn't even think about that when I thought about, Me Too at first, that it kind of started with um the print, right, which is traditional media, and how it gave it some legitimacy before it moved to social media, which I understood. I thought it was logical. I understood that the social linguistics of it all. But yeah, I didn't hear about the movie or see the movie, but maybe it's something I can try to watch.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to watch the, like Christine said, the pressure that he put
Yeah,
on
I
them.
could imagine because yeah, he was a pretty powerful person in the industry, so I can imagine the pressure they had.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was really interesting. Thank you.
You are welcome. All right, if there are no more comments or questions, we can close in prayer.
Sure. And then I do have a closing hymn after prayer.
Okay. All right, let's pray. Lord God in heaven, we are grateful again for this holy Sabbath day. We're grateful for Christ and his sacrifice and his knowledge and his wisdom that he has poured on this movement. We are grateful for living in this time in Earth's history, and we're grateful for how you have sprung up many people um, in this time where we see many individuals and their contributions and how they are trying to raise the call for equality. So we're grateful for them. We're grateful for the prophets that are crying out, that have been also leading the charge in this history. And we thank you for this movement that you have allowed us to be a part of. And we are just so grateful for your mercy on us and your grace. And we thank you again for this Sabbath day. And we thank you for being able to come together and to study and worship and fill our cups with Elder Parminder earlier. We are just your servants, and we want to continue to stay on this path with you all the way to all the way back to heavenly Canaan. So we just praise you and we thank you in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.